In the stillness of a frozen world where the winds whispered across endless white plains and life clung to survival one breath at a time, there existed an age so cold, so vast in its reach, that it shaped the very roots of human history. Tonight we will drift gently into that time, to the deep Ice Age, not as distant observers, but as quiet travelers, following the crunch of fur-wrapped feet in snow, feeling the sting of glacial wind, hearing the crackle of fire in dark caves, and watching the stars shimmer above frozen landscapes. If this journey moves you, if you find peace in these stories of long-forgotten winters, feel free to leave a comment, subscribe, or simply say goodnight in your own words below. Every whisper adds to the firelight. Now, let us begin. The sun does not rise quickly in the Ice Age. It creeps, pale, distant, and filtered through thick veils of frost and fog. When your eyes first open inside the shelter of your group's cave, the air you exhale turns to mist, floating gently before your face. The stone walls are dark, charred with old soot and painted with fading figures, mammoths, deer, handprints. The fire in the center of the shelter has died to embers, and already the cold is seeping through your fur coverings. You pull the thick hide tighter around your shoulders and listen to the sounds of others, the stirring of a sleeping child, the shuffle of someone adding wood to the fire, the rhythmic breath of the elder who always wakes first. Outside, the world is still. Snow blankets the earth in an unbroken white that stretches into forever. Trees stand black and bare against the gray sky, and the only movement is the drifting of snowflakes in the breeze. There is no clock here. Time is marked by light and the movement of animals. A successful hunt means survival. A failed one means another night of hunger. You eat dried roots and meat warmed near the fire. You share with others, because here alone means death. Your group will not stay here long. You are nomads, like many others. As the herds move, so do you. You follow the reindeer, the mammoth, the aurochs, the great beasts of this frozen earth. You will travel together using memory and instinct, guided by the landscape and stars, looking for places where rivers still flow and where caves can shield from storms. But before the journey there is ritual. Hands are warmed, tools are checked. Words are spoken softly, not loudly, for noise carries strangely in this frozen world. A child is wrapped in a carrier, and the elder leads the way, holding a staff carved with notches, a history of movement. The cold is not your enemy, but it is ever present. It shapes your every choice, every breath. You know its rhythm. You know the sky. You step out into the snow. The wind greets you like an old companion. Another day begins in the Ice Age. As you venture further into the Ice Age, you realize that survival depends not only on hunting, but on mastering the art of shelter. In the vast glacial wilderness, a simple mistake and exposure could mean the end. So how did our ancestors, with only primitive tools and no modern materials, manage to build places warm enough to sleep in, rest, and wait out the worst of the weather? Let us begin at the edge of a wind-swept tundra, where a small band of people are searching for a place to construct their seasonal home. The sky above is an endless gray sheet, and the ground beneath is rock-hard permafrost. With little access to timber in many regions, especially in northern Europe and Siberia, Ice Age humans turned to other creative resources. Mammoth bones, for example, were a staple of shelter construction. These colossal creatures, when hunted successfully, not only provided meat and hide, but also giant curved tusks and thick bones that could serve as the framework of a dwelling. Imagine standing in a circle of upright mammoth ribs, partially buried in the snow to keep them steady. Over this frame, thick hides were stretched tightly and anchored with stones. Snow was then piled on top to add insulation, forming an igloo-like dome that blocked out wind and held in precious heat. These structures were surprisingly warm inside. A small fire in the center, fueled by dried dung or gathered brush, provided heat and light, and the walls, packed with snow, helped trap the warmth. Some communities who lived near forested areas made use of wood, crafting lean-tos or pit houses partially sunk into the earth for insulation. Pit houses were particularly ingenious, dug into the ground and covered with a wooden roof layered with hides and snow. The ground temperature was more stable than the air, so even in extreme cold, the earth offered a measure of warmth. These homes could house entire families who would huddle together with flickering fires and stone oil lamps casting soft shadows on the walls. Living together in such tight quarters meant that warmth was shared. People slept close, wrapped in furs, with dogs sometimes sharing the space for added warmth. The air was smoky, the scent of tanned hides and hearths lingering thickly. Every creak of the ice outside, every howl of the wind, reminded them of the thin barrier that separated them from the deadly cold. Maintaining these shelters was a constant task. Hide coverings had to be checked for tears and looseness. Fires had to be tended carefully to avoid asphyxiation, and snow accumulation on the outer walls had to be managed to avoid collapse. The entrances were usually low and narrow, helping to keep the heat from escaping, but making every entrance and exit a crouching struggle. Children learned early how to help with the upkeep, patching small holes, collecting snow for melting, and cleaning the fire pit. Stories were told by the fireside, passed down from memory, often involving the spirits of the wind or ancient beasts that roamed the icy plains. These tales helped children understand the dangers beyond the walls and the importance of staying close to the group. The Ice Age shelter was more than just a home. It was a fortress against nature, a center of family life, and a monument to human ingenuity. Each structure was shaped by necessity and memory, reflecting the knowledge passed down through generations of survivors. Every bone, every hide, every stone placed in its construction told a story of the hunt, of endurance, of community. In this frozen world, to build shelter was to stake a claim against extinction. And with every passing storm, the mere survival of these ancient humans proved their resilience. Now, let us go even deeper into their lives. What did they eat when the hunt failed? How did they store food with no refrigeration? And what plants, if any, grew in such a barren land? Let us explore their food and sustenance next. In the muffled quiet of a snow-covered world, when the howling winds faded and the frost settled thick on every surface, the warmth of a shelter was only part of the equation for survival. Inside, beneath the mammoth bone frames and heavy hides, the small flicker of firelight would reveal another pressing concern. What was there to eat? With no agriculture, no planted crops, and no livestock to manage, the Ice Age diet was shaped entirely by the seasons, the land, and the movements of the great beasts that roamed the steppe. Yet somehow, against all odds, our ancestors not only found food, but developed methods to store and prepare it clever techniques that helped them survive some of the harshest climates in human history. Let us picture that same family again, nestled inside their winter shelter, huddled beneath furs and skins. A carved stone bowl rests near the fire, inside which stews a faintly steaming mix of bone marrow, dried meat, and boiled roots. Outside, the snow piles high, and the winds threaten to freeze breath in the air. But in here, dinner is being made slowly, carefully, from the hard-earned remains of past hunts. When a mammoth or reindeer was killed, every part was used. The meat, of course, was the most essential. It was often sliced into thin strips and dried over smoke or in the cold, open air, turning it into a form of jerky that could last for weeks, even months. Smoking was more common near forested areas where wood was available. In colder, open plains, freezing itself preserved the meat. It would be stored in pits or stone-lined caches outside the shelter, naturally frozen by the frigid temperatures. Fat was equally vital. It was rendered and stored in animal bladders or stomachs and added to meals for calories and warmth. In a world without carbohydrates, fat and protein were everything. Bone marrow, too, was a prized source of nourishment, split open with stone tools and savored with simple stone spoons, or even sipped directly from the broken bones. And yet, meat alone did not make the diet. While much of the Ice Age tundra was barren in winter, there were periods of warmth, short bursts of summer when the landscape transformed into a wild garden. During these brief windows, families gathered roots, berries, nuts, and edible greens. They would dry or bury them for later use, packing them in moss or hide-lined pits to stay cool. Even in cold seasons, there were hardy plants like wild onions, cattails, and tubers that could be dug up if the ground was soft enough. Some communities learned to chew bark or brew herbal infusions from pine needles for their vitamin content, helping prevent sickness like scurvy. Hunting, too, required careful timing and technique. Herd animals like reindeer, musk oxen, and mammoths migrated with the seasons. Bands of hunters would watch for signs, tracks in the snow, droppings, broken branches, and follow them for days. They would set traps, dig pits, or drive animals toward narrow passes where spears could be thrown. A single large kill could feed an entire group for weeks, but only if preserved quickly. There were also smaller catches. Snowshoe hares, Arctic foxes, and even birds were trapped or caught with nets and slings. Fish, surprisingly, were a seasonal source of food. Ice was broken to access rivers and lakes, and stone or bone-tipped fishing spears were thrust into the dark water with practiced precision. In some areas, simple hooks carved from antler were used, baited with insects or small bits of meat. The act of eating was not just about nutrition. It was a ritual, a shared moment. Meals were eaten in silence or with soft conversation, stories shared around the fire. The first bite of stored meat after a long, hungry day was a quiet triumph. Children learned to chew slowly to savor and to understand that every piece came from struggle, patience, and wisdom. There was no waste. The stomach lining might become a pouch. The sinew, stripped from meat, became thread for sewing. The bones became tools, ornaments, or musical instruments. In this way, the very act of eating connected Ice Age people to the cycle of life and death, to the animals they respected, and to the land they depended on. Over time, certain communities may have developed recipes, not written, of course, but passed down orally. A favored combination of meat and herbs. a way to ferment or preserve a mixture in the cold. These traditions became part of the memory of each group, encoded in taste and smell, in preparation and patience. As the snow thickens outside and the fire crackles low, you can almost imagine the smell of cooking marrow and wood smoke. You can feel the hunger, but also the deep comfort of knowing that food has been stored, prepared, and shared. And now, as the family settles into the night, bellies warm and full, another question lingers. What were their days like? How did they pass the endless hours of cold when hunting was not possible and the storms kept them inside? Let us now explore their daily routines, the rhythms of Ice Age life during long, frozen days. The sky is pale and heavy, stretched over a frozen horizon of endless white. Snow drifts gently, silently, a soft curtain over the footprints left the night before. Somewhere in the distance, the wind groans low across the tundra. But inside the shelter, the cold has not yet won. A small fire burns at the center of a ring of stones. Above it, strips of frozen meat hang on a wooden rack, softening slightly in the warmth. The air inside smells of smoke, fat, and fur, earthy, musky, but familiar. This is home, or at least the closest thing to it. The Ice Age family stirs slowly from beneath layers of hide and woven grasses. There is no clock, no alarm, only the gradual rise of pale light outside the flap of the shelter and the distant sounds of animals moving beneath the snow. The first to rise might be the grandmother, aged and wrapped tightly in wool and fur. Her hands are worn from years of scraping hides, but they still move with purpose as she stokes the fire and checks the warmth of the stones buried under the sleeping mats. Soon after, the others follow. A child groans, shifting from one fur pile to another. The father rises to crouch by the fire, checking the stored meat and melting snow on a bone pot to make warm broth. The mother tends to the younger children, wrapping them again in dry hides and murmuring soft words in a language that has never been written but carries generations in its syllables. There is no rush, no appointments, no meetings. Time in the Ice Age flows like snowmelt, slow, quiet, and patient. But the cold does not forgive idleness. Every day must be useful. The first task is always warmth. Once the fire is burning hot, stones are heated and wrapped in scraps of fur to be carried around the body or tucked under bedding. Dried moss is gathered from storage and used to line boots. A thin layer of grease is rubbed into exposed skin to guard against frostbite. Clothing is carefully repaired with bone needles and sinew thread fur leggings, hide tunics, and hats sewn from reindeer scalp, ears still attached for warmth. Outside, the world is white and vast. A boy steps out, a spear longer than he is slung across his back. He is learning to read the snow. He looks for rabbit tracks, those double dots that vanish under a log or the feathered print of an owl dragging its kill. He listens for cracks in the ice, or the creak of trees shifting under snow weight. Every detail is important. Every sound could mean survival. Back at the shelter, the women are working. One scrapes a hide, stretching it taut between antler stakes using sharp stone tools to remove the last bits of flesh. Another is boiling bones in a stone-lined pit, extracting marrow and softening them to make tools. Children help where they can, sorting dried roots, breaking ice for water, tossing pebbles at ravens to scare them from the food cache. Midday is not marked by sun, for often the sky remains a constant, dull gray. But hunger comes, and with it, The family gathers around the fire for the first meal. A thick soup, perhaps a mix of old meat, boiled tubers, and a hint of dried berries dropped in for flavor. It is shared with carved spoons or sipped directly from wooden cups. Everyone eats in silence. The fire crackles. The wind whispers. A child giggles, then hushes again. The afternoon is for tasks and practice. The father and older children may leave to check trapline snares laid the day before for hare or fox. If lucky, they return dragging a fresh carcass, already stiff with cold. If not, they return with more knowledge about movement, migration, and patience. Inside, storytelling may begin. The grandmother traces a pattern in the dust, recalling a hunt from her youth. She sings an old song, her voice low and wavering, passed down through memory. The children lean close, not just for the warmth, but for the story. Stories teach survival. They teach what the stars mean, what the animals know, and how the world came to be so cold. As the light fades, though it was barely bright to begin with, the family prepares for night. Traps are reset. Tools are stored. The fire is banked with ash to burn low and steady. A skin of water is placed nearby to thaw slowly. Children curl close to their mother. The father sits up a while longer, sharpening a spear or whittling a small toy from bone. Then comes the silence. It is not the silence of fear or isolation, but the hush of a world blanketed by snow. It is the sound of survival, of stillness, of breath. In this world, each day is a victory. Every task, no matter how small, is part of a greater rhythm. Wake, warm, work, eat, mend, hunt, rest. And in between there is laughter, learning, and the quiet bond of those who endure together. But what happened when danger came close, when predators lurked, when storms approached, or when the ice cracked beneath their feet? Let us now enter the darker corners of Ice Age survival, where every shadow might be a threat. The fire crackles softly as darkness sets in again, curling smoke into the fabric of the hide shelter. Outside, the snow has grown heavier, masking scent and sound beneath a thick white shroud. The family settles into sleep, but not without caution. Danger in the Ice Age never truly sleeps. It waits, watches, moves silently beneath the same stars. Out here in this vast and frozen world, every shadow may hold risk. Some you expect, others you never see coming. It begins with the predators. Imagine the slow silence of snowfall, the hush of wind pushing flurries across a flat, white plain. In that silence, far beyond the firelight, massive paws press softly into the snow, almost noiseless. A scent rides on the air, warm and human. Meat, fat, breath, and it draws the attention of a beast with eyes suited for night and a hunger deeper than winter itself. The cave lion, larger than any lion known today, was not a creature of fantasy. It was real, and it hunted in groups, powerful, silent, golden-coated beasts with muscles coiled under thick fur. A single lion could take down a reindeer. A pack could circle a mammoth. And a sleeping family in a poorly guarded shelter? Easy prey unless they knew how to listen. Then there were the dire wolves, heavier than today's wolves, with thicker skulls and crushing jaws. They stalked the ice valleys, trailing herds and humans alike. Their howls, when they came, were distant and bone-deep, but often they did not howl at all. They simply circled, waited, tested, watching to see who was injured, who was too slow, which child lagged behind. Even the short-faced bear, a creature of staggering size and solitary aggression, roamed these lands. Taller than a man even on all fours, it could smell blood from miles away. When it approached, there was no negotiation, no intimidation, only raw, unstoppable power. And yet, the Ice Age people endured because they understood these creatures. They studied them, knew their tracks, their patterns, their habits. They layered their shelters with thick walls of snow and fur. They posted watchers even at night. Some built tripwire traps made of sinew and bone just beyond the camp to alert them of movement. Others hung bones and shells from branches to clatter like primitive wind chimes, giving warning with the faintest breeze. But not all danger had teeth. Many died without ever seeing a predator. The ice itself could kill. One wrong step across a frozen river, what looked solid might give way. A splash, a gasp, a scream swallowed by rushing water, then silence. Cold water was not forgiving. Within minutes, breath would slow. Muscles would cramp. A child pulled from a freezing river had little hope unless heat was found quickly for fire, friction, and prayer. And then there were the avalanches. Mountain dwellers, especially those following herds into high passes, knew the quiet dread of shifting snow. A single shout could trigger a cascade. The world would groan, then roar, and in an instant, a hillside would collapse in white fury. Entire camps had been lost beneath it. No time to run, no time to scream, only stillness, then burial. Falling through a snow-covered crevasse was another silent killer. The land often hid its wounds. Deep cracks opened in the glacial ice, covered over by fresh snow. A hunter chasing a hare, a child fetching water. It took only one careless step, and then they vanished. Some were never found. The family searched, shouting into the cold wind, calling a name that would never echo back. Disease, too, was a hidden enemy. No one in the Ice Age knew the word bacteria, but they knew what sickness looked like. A cough that lingered, a wound that festered, a fever that burned even in snow. Without medicine, infection was feared more than wounds. A scratch from a stone tool could swell into agony. A bite from a rodent could become deadly. Some shamans carried herbs and bitter roots. Others burned fragrant plants over the sick. But more often they relied on time, isolation, and luck. And then there was hunger, a slow killer, the kind that haunted dreams. There were seasons when the prey vanished, when even the wolves seemed thin, when the snow grew too deep to trap, and nothing moved across the tundra. On those nights, the family sat in silence, watching the fire, chewing on boiled leather or licking marrowless bones, eyes sunken, bellies empty, songs stopped. Laughter became rare. Hunger changed people. It made the strong weak, made the cautious reckless. A hunter might go too far in search of food, might brave a cave that smelled of bear, or cross ice that cracked beneath him. Desperation was a danger of its own. But even surrounded by so much threat, Ice Age families found ways to stay calm, to stay human. They built rituals, wove amulets of antler and carved ivory to hang near sleeping places. They left offerings of blood or carved stones at the base of sacred trees. They believed in spirits that protected hunters, that guided the animals, that whispered in dreams. Whether or not those spirits were real did not matter. The belief gave them courage, and courage was a survival tool as important as fire or stone. They trusted in each other. A family alone could not survive long, but a band, a group that shared food, watched over children, tended the sick, that could last. That could face wolves in the dark and walk through snowstorms without breaking. Even now, as the world has changed and the great beasts are gone, something in us remembers that time, that quiet fear of the dark, that hush when snow falls thick, that instinct to gather close, share warmth, and listen for what might be watching. Danger in the Ice Age was constant, but so was resilience. And with that resilience came something else, something surprising, perhaps. Moments of joy. Yes, in the midst of danger and hardship, Ice Age people still found ways to celebrate, to play, to laugh. Let us now step into the warmth of those moments in the next segment. We imagine the Ice Age as a time of constant cold, hunger, and struggle, and it was. But it was also a time when laughter echoed across the snow, when songs drifted into the night sky, and when even the harshest winters couldn't freeze the human spirit. Because joy was not a luxury in the Ice Age. It was a survival tool. The need for joy in a harsh land, in a world where danger lurked beyond the firelight and every meal was hard-won. Moments of happiness were as vital as food and shelter. Joy bound the group together. It kept the mind sharp and the heart steady. Without it, hopelessness could creep in, and hopelessness was deadly. So Ice Age families made room for laughter. They made time for games. They made music. They told stories. They danced. And they passed these traditions down just as carefully as they passed down hunting techniques and shelter-building skills. Games beneath the mammoth bone roof. Picture this, a domed shelter of mammoth bones and hides, lit by the soft orange glow of a fat-fueled lamp. Outside, the wind howls, throwing snow against the walls. Inside, a group of children giggle as they slide smooth animal bones across the floor in a game not unlike bowling. The pins are carved pieces of wood or bone, each etched with little faces or animal shapes. The ball might be a rounded stone. The object is simple: knock down as many pins as you can. But the real goal is the joy of playing together. Some games involved skill, tossing small stones into a circle drawn in the snow, or trying to throw spears through a narrow gap in a hide curtain. Others were purely playful, chasing each other in tight spaces, wrestling, or even pretending to be animals from the great herds outside. Older members sometimes joined in, laughing along with the young. These games were more than just entertainment. They trained reflexes, balance, and aim, skills that might one day save a life. Music, the voice of the camp, but if the Ice Age had a heartbeat, it was music. Hollow bird bones became flutes. Strips of hide stretched over carved wooden frames became drums. Antlers struck against one another produced a clacking rhythm that could be heard above the wind. Evenings often ended with music. Hunters returning from a long day's trek might hum a low tune as they sat by the fire. Children would clap or stop in time. Someone might pull out a bone flute and send high, clear notes rising into the smoke-filled air. Some songs told stories of the first mammoth hunt, of a hero who braved the ice, of a bird that brought the sun back after a long winter. Others were simple lullabies, meant to soothe restless children or ease the tension before sleep. Music connected them to the land, to each other, and perhaps to something greater than themselves. Dancing on snow and ice celebrations weren't always quiet affairs. Sometimes, especially after a big hunt, the camp erupted in dance. The hunters would return carrying meat, hides, and bones. Fires would burn high, casting long shadows against the snow. People would stomp their feet to keep warm, spinning and leaping around the flames, arms raised to the sky. These dances were often imitations of the animals they hunted. Someone might bend low and stomp like a mammoth. Another might dart quick and light like a reindeer. Children would squeal and try to copy them, stumbling and laughing. Dance was part ritual, part gratitude, part pure joy. It celebrated not only survival, but also the animals that gave them life. Storytelling, the first cinema, and then there were the stories. Imagine lying on a bed of furs, your breath misting in the cold air, listening to the deep, steady voice of an elder. His hands move in the firelight, casting shadows on the curved hide walls. He tells of a time when the sky fell in sheets of fire, of a beast so large it could block out the moon, of a girl who followed a blue bird through the snow and found the spring where all rivers began. Sometimes these stories were warnings, cautionary tales about wandering too far or forgetting to respect the animals. Other times they were simply for wonder, to remind the listeners that there was more to the world than hunger and fear, that children would remember these stories for life. They would tell them to their own children, and so across thousands of years the stories lived on. Why joy survived the ice even in an age of ice and predators, humans sought beauty. They carved tiny animals from ivory. They painted mammoths and bison on cave walls. They strung beads from shells and bones to wear as necklaces. These acts didn't fill stomachs or keep bodies warm, but they fed the spirit. They kept the mind alive. And perhaps most importantly, they reminded people that they were more than just survivors. They were dreamers, musicians, storytellers. And so, in the coldest era of human history, joy burned as brightly as any fire. The Ice Age was not a time of stillness. It was a time of movement, endless, necessary movement. For where the herds went, the people followed. And in the frozen wilderness, the herds were the lifeblood of survival. The call of the herds, the great animals of the Ice Age, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, reindeer, horses, did not linger in one place for long. They traveled vast distances in search of grazing lands, moving in great rivers of muscle and fur across the tundra. Our ancestors had no choice but to shadow them. A single herd could feed a group for weeks. But if the herd moved on and the hunters failed to follow, hunger would follow instead. These migrations were predictable in a way, tied to the seasons, the melting of ice, the greening of grass, but nature had its surprises. A sudden snowstorm could alter a herd's path. Rivers could swell and block the way. Predators could scatter the animals, forcing hunters to track them through dangerous terrain. The journey begins, imagine it. The morning sun is a pale smear above the horizon, barely warming the frost-crusted ground. The camp has been packed before dawn, hides folded, tools bundled, meat stored in skin bags, fires stamped out. Men, women, and children trudge together across the snow, their furs crusted with frost from their own breath. Dogs trot ahead, sniffing the wind. The hunters keep their eyes on distant hills, scanning for the faint movement of the herd, dark shapes shifting against the white. Every journey is a test. They carry only what they can. The strongest pull sleds made of bone and hide. The weak are helped along or carried if needed. Rest stops are brief, for the herds will not wait. Signs in the snow. The land itself becomes the hunter's map. A crushed patch of snow stained with droppings means the herd passed here recently. Deep furrows in the frost mark where heavy mammoth feet sank. A single shed antler gleaming against the ice is a sign the reindeer are near. The hunters read these clues with practiced eyes, each one a whisper of direction. Crossing the white desert. Following the herds means crossing landscapes as alien as another planet. Frozen rivers must be navigated carefully, for the ice may be thin in places. Endless plains of wind-blown snow offer no shelter, forcing the group to push through until they find cover. Sometimes they travel for days without a successful hunt, eating dried meat and sipping melted snow. Sometimes they are blessed, stumbling upon a herd resting, unaware of the hunter's approach. The tension before a hunt is palpable. The hunters creep low, their breath slow and steady. The air is so cold that each exhale turns to crystals that drift in the wind. Then the sudden burst of action, spears arcing through the air, shouts breaking the silence, the thundering stampede of startled animals. The feast and the farewell when the hunt succeeds, the camp erupts in relief and celebration. Fires are lit high. Meat is roasted. Hides are stretched and prepared for shelter. Bones are set aside for tools and weapons. But no matter how large the kill, the feast is temporary. The herd moves on, and soon the group must follow again. The pattern repeats: hunt, rest, pack, travel. In the rhythm of these migrations, Ice Age humans learned patience, resilience, and the value of mobility. They became masters of the moving life, never bound to one place, always ready to go where the animals led. The deeper connection, following the herds, was not just about survival. It forged a bond between humans and the great beasts of the Ice Age. Hunters learned the herd's habits, moods, and even personalities. They knew which valleys the mammoths favored in winter, which rivers the reindeer crossed in spring, and when the bison would return to the grassy plains. In this way, the herds were both prey and partners, their movements dictating the rhythm of human life, their survival intertwined with our own. And so, step by step, mile by mile, across the frozen earth, humans walked in the footprints of giants. In the endless cold of the Ice Age, there were places where the wind could not follow, where shadows were deep, fires flickered long into the night, and the walls themselves seemed alive with memory. These were the caves, sanctuaries carved by nature, claimed by humankind. Entering the hidden world. Picture the mouth of a cave on a winter morning, a black hollow against the pale snow, its entrance rimmed with icicles. Inside, the air is still, smelling faintly of damp earth and smoke. The first steps into the darkness are slow, careful. The flicker of a torch casts dancing light that reveals uneven walls, jagged stone, and pools of shadow that swallow the firelight whole. For Ice Age people, a cave was more than a shelter. It was a fortress against predators, a shield against the wind, and in some cases, a sacred place where the human and spiritual worlds met. Living in stone's embrace, the deeper you go, the more the outside world fades. Here the temperature is steady, insulated from the deadly swings outside. Furs are laid out over stone ledges forming beds. Fires burn in shallow pits, their smoke escaping through cracks and holes in the ceiling. The stone walls echo with the sounds of daily life, the clink of flint being shaped into blades, the murmur of voices telling old stories, the crackle of wood and bone burning in the fire. caves offered natural advantages. Their walls blocked the howling winds, and their interiors stayed warmer than the open plains. A single well-built fire could keep a small group from freezing through the night. Still, living here was not without its dangers: unstable rock, flooding from melting snow, and the lurking threat of predators that might also seek shelter. The artists of the ice. But caves were not just homes, they were canvases. The walls tell stories still visible tens of thousands of years later. By the light of flickering torches, skilled hands mixed pigments from ground ochre, charcoal, and minerals. They painted scenes of mammoths, horses, lions, and bison, not as crude stick figures, but in sweeping lines and layered colors. The animals seem to move when the torchlight dances, a kind of prehistoric animation. Some figures were carved directly into the rock, their outlines gouged with stone tools. Others were traced with hands dipped in pigment, leaving prints like silent signatures. These works may have been more than decoration. Some believe they were part of rituals, calls for success in the hunt, acts of respect for the animals, or attempts to connect with forces beyond the human world. Sounds in the darkness caves had their own music. Voices carried strangely, sometimes seeming to come from behind you. Hunters could test echoes, clapping or calling into the dark. Some spots amplified sound, making them perfect for ceremonies or storytelling. The drumbeat of hollow logs, the whistle of bone flutes, the rhythmic clack of stones, all could have filled the cavern, blending with the crackle of fire to create a soundscape that has been lost to time. Life by the fire. Nights in the cave were moments of fragile peace. Families huddled together, their shadows long on the wall. Children drifted to sleep, listening to tales of the world outside, of roaming herds, prowling predators, and the spirits believed to dwell in the ice and sky. The fire was tended carefully. Its light was the heart of the camp. In its glow, hunters repaired weapons, women tanned hides, and elders passed on the knowledge that would carry the group through another winter. The cave as a memory. When a group moved on, their presence lingered. Ash from old fires, scraps of bone, broken tools, and fading wall art told the story of lives once lived here. Sometimes generations returned to the same cave, adding new layers of history to its walls. These caves, scattered across Europe and Asia, became silent witnesses to thousands of winters, storing the breath, footsteps, and dreams of people who lived and died before the first cities were ever built. In the end, a cave was more than a refuge. It was a time capsule, a place where survival, creativity, and belief came together in the heart of the frozen world. In the Ice Age, survival was not only a battle against hunger and cold, it was also a journey of the spirit. When every day was uncertain, when life could end in a sudden storm or a predator's attack, humans turned to something beyond the visible world. A world filled with spirits for Ice Age people. The frozen earth was alive. Every river, mountain, and animal had a spirit. The wind that tore across the tundra wasn't just air. It was a being, sometimes a friend, sometimes a threat. Fire wasn't only heat. It was a living force that needed care and respect. This worldview gave meaning to the chaos of survival. If a hunt succeeded, it wasn't only skill. It was because the spirit of the animal allowed itself to be taken. If the weather cleared after days of blizzard, it was a gift from a greater power. The shamans, walking between worlds, in many groups there were those believed to walk between the human world and the world of spirits, shamans. These figures carried deep respect and sometimes fear. A shaman might wear the antlers of a deer, the skull of a bear, or the feathers of a great bird. Their clothing was often decorated with bones, claws, and carved beads, each holding symbolic meaning. In trance-like states induced by rhythmic drumming, chanting, or even herbs, they were said to travel beyond the body, seeking guidance, healing, or protection for the tribe. The shaman's role was vital: to interpret dreams, to bless the hunt, to heal the sick, and to maintain balance between the people and the unseen world. Rituals in the firelight around the campfire or in the deep chambers of caves, rituals unfolded. Hands painted in ochre left marks on walls, a connection between human and spirit. Small figurines carved from bone or ivory, some of women with exaggerated features, others of animals, were used in ceremonies whose exact meaning is lost to us. Some rituals likely involved song, dance, and the rhythmic beating of drums, mimicking the sounds of hoofbeats or the crash of waves against ice. These acts may have been both entertainment and sacred performance, a way to speak to forces that could not be seen. Symbols of life and death, the Ice Age world was a constant reminder of mortality. Burial practices show that even in the harshest environments, people treated the dead with reverence. Some bodies were laid to rest with tools, ornaments, or red ochre sprinkled over them, a symbol of life and blood. This suggests a belief in a journey beyond death, perhaps to another hunting ground, free of hunger and cold. The power of dreams and stories. Dreams were seen as more than the mind's wandering. They were messages, warnings, visions, or calls to action. Elders and shamans interpreted them, guiding the tribe based on what the dream revealed. Stories, too, carried spiritual weight. Myths explained the origins of the world, the reasons for the seasons, and the rules of survival. These tales often featured animal helpers, tricksters, and great cosmic battles, weaving moral lessons into the fabric of belief. Why belief mattered. In a world where survival was never guaranteed, belief was more than faith. It was a survival tool. It gave people a sense of control, a framework for understanding the unpredictable, and a reason to keep moving forward. Whether or not the spirits were real, they shaped how humans acted, hunted, built, and treated one another. And in that way, the spiritual world was as real as the snow under their feet. The Ice Age was not eternal. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the world began to shift. Winters grew shorter. Summers warmed. Glaciers that had towered like frozen walls for millennia began to retreat. Rivers swelled with meltwater, carving new paths across the land. To the people who had known only cold, wind, and snow, this was a transformation unlike anything before. A new age was arriving, and survival meant adapting once again. The first signs of change for generations, the seasons had been predictable in their severity. But then came subtle changes. The snow melted earlier. Certain plants began appearing in places they had not grown before, and some animals migrated differently, altering their ancient patterns. These shifts were both a blessing and a threat. Warmer weather meant easier living in some ways, less time huddled in shelters, more variety of plants, and a longer window for hunting. But it also meant that the great Ice Age beasts, which humans had relied on for food, clothing, and shelter materials, began to vanish. The disappearance of giants, the mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the giant deer, these massive creatures had shaped Ice Age life. Their hides provided warmth, their bones became tools and homes, and their meat could feed families for months. But as the climate warmed and grasslands shrank, these giants declined. Some believe overhunting by humans played a role. Others point to changing ecosystems that could no longer sustain such large animals. Whatever the cause, their disappearance forced humans to adapt quickly, shifting from hunting giants to pursuing smaller, quicker game like deer, elk, and boar. A new way of living. As the world warmed, forests began to spread over lands that had once been open tundra. This change altered not only the available animals, but also the tools and techniques of survival. Hunting in dense forests required new strategies, lighter weapons, quieter movements, and perhaps even the beginnings of traps and snares. Fishing grew more important as rivers teemed with life, and communities near coasts began gathering shellfish in abundance. With warmer weather, plant foods became more diverse. Berries, nuts, roots, and seeds were gathered in greater quantities, perhaps even stored for later. Settling down, the end of the Ice Age may have also encouraged the first steps toward a more settled life. With more stable climates and richer environments, some groups began returning to the same places year after year. Semi-permanent shelters could be built, food stored, and knowledge of local resources passed down with greater precision. While true farming was still far in the future, the seeds of that revolution may have been sown here, in the rich soils left behind by retreating glaciers, where wild grains grew thick and game returned predictably. The death of an era to those who lived through it. The end of the Ice Age must have been bittersweet. The harsh winters, the endless hunts, the long nights in firelit shelters, these had defined their lives. But now the world they knew was melting away. The spirits of the ice, if they were believed to exist, were retreating with the glaciers. Yet, as one world ended, another began. The children born into this warming earth would never know the same biting winds or endless snowfields. They would grow up among forests and rivers, chasing deer through green shadows instead of across white plains. The legacy of the Ice Age. Even as the Ice Age faded, its legacy endured in human memory, passed down through story, ritual, and the marks left on stone walls. It had shaped humanity, sharpening intelligence, strengthening communities, and forging resilience in the face of an unforgiving world. When we look back, we see not just a time of hardship, but a time when human creativity, cooperation, and adaptability reached new heights. The Ice Age ended, but its lessons carried forward into every age that followed. And so the great story of survival, from frozen plains to fertile forests, became part of who we are.